The Cleveland Browns traded away Baker Mayfield. We'll talk about that, the impact it has on the Steelers. Was it good for the Steelers that Baker Mayfield's gone? Was it bad because they might have to play him in week 15, or is it a good thing? We'll talk about that, the impact on the AFC North quarterback standings, and also where are those power rankings? How do we feel about these quarterbacks in the AFC North? We'll talk about that and more right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things at the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our breaking news updates and any bonus episodes we release. Today, we've got our man, Wes Uhler. You know him from Steeler Nation Radio, from the Ears and Beers podcast if you're a West Virginia fan. But he's back. We always love having him on. Wes, how you doing?
What's up, CC? I am doing fantastic. It is a pleasure, as always.
Same here. It's always glad to be on screen with you, buddy. But let's talk about the big news that came from yesterday, and it was that the Cleveland Browns did end up moving Baker Mayfield to the Carolina Panthers, one of the rumored potential landing spots that he had. They received a conditional fifth-round pick, and he lost, I believe it was, $3.5 million. He had to give up $3.5 million in his salary. I think the Browns had to eat up, $10 million or so of that salary, and then the Panthers paid the rest. It seems like to me, I look at this situation before we get into all the Steelers stuff, because this is AFC North, news. This is, Baker Mayfield was a rival of the Steelers, but it seems like to me like this is a move that I felt like the Panthers didn't have to make unless they really felt they needed to get Baker on their team and they wanted to do that before anyone else could try to jump in. But I this whole time I've been saying, like, man, like, if the Browns don't want to like actually give me something, why would I trade anything to pick up Baker Mayfield? But in retrospect, if it's just a fifth round pick for 2024, not even the next draft, but 2 drafts down the line, and you're not paying you're paying like a smaller part of that yearly salary he has right now. Mm-hmm. Did the Panthers make out with this, or did the Browns finally get lucky and got rid of Baker in a way that doesn't look as embarrassing? Because to me, this looks like a joke.
I think maybe it's a little bit of both, honestly. If you're Cleveland, Chris, you're absolutely right, but they were always going to, kind of be rightfully criticized for how this all went down. To me, though, I still think anything is better than just having to cut Baker Mayfield and eat that entire cap hit. So you get to scale that back a little bit, and yeah, 5th-round pick, okay. But again, anything was better than just having to release him and eat that entire number and get absolutely nothing back for a guy that you just drafted first overall. Like, not first round, first overall. A few years ago. And then, if you're Carolina, you could have played the whole let's make Cleveland release this guy and then we can get him without giving anything up, and maybe we can sign him to a cheaper contract. I think for Carolina, though, it's pretty clear they weren't the only team that was thinking that way. Seattle could have been thinking the same thing. There certainly could have been other few teams around the league. So if you're sitting there and you're Carolina and you're saying, all right, well, we can still get this guy on an affordable number, and we only have to give up a conditional 5th-round draft pick to do so. We won't have to compete with Seattle and this other team or two whenever he does hit the free agency market. If you're Matt Rule and you're Ben McAdoo and you think that's your guy that's going to, turn your reputations back around, I think that's a fair price to pay to get a guy that you believe in. So I think it's a little bit of both. But you're right. I mean, Cleveland was always going to kind of look foolish no matter what happened. At least they get something, and Carolina gets a guy that, they didn't have to give up much for, who now they can get into the system and get ready for the season and not be kind of waiting around for Cleveland to make the first move.
Now I feel you on that. Like, there was the chance you wanted to beat out anyone else that might be competitive with you and might actually make you have to sign Baker Mayfield to some money if an auction started going on, because he is a former first overall pick quarterback. Mind you, before we get into the Steelers part of this, the Browns had a chance to pick either Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson with that first overall pick. They chose Baker Mayfield, and not only that, but now they weren't able to complete his rookie contract with him. It shows again why the Browns are still the Browns, and why they're still they may have like their occasional like, hey, we've improved moment, but they're still an organization that is just in complete chaos. And we'll get into the Deshaun Watson situation in the next segment. But Wes, this is now a situation where the Steelers, I feel like they've gotten used to Baker Mayfield. Some people feel like, oh man, he was such a burden on the Steelers. I never saw it that way. I felt like the only time that the Steelers struggled when Baker Mayfield was on the field is just because, hey, they had injury concerns or other parts of the Browns were actually beating them, like their much improved offensive line, Nick Chubb being a serious threat, Kareem Hunt being a number 2 threat behind Nick Chubb. So Kareem Hunt, him, and then Jarvis Landry getting really good. Odell Beckham Jr. being there, even though Odell Beckham Jr. never really hurt them while he was with the Browns. To me, it was always the composite, and Baker just, to me, he was more like just a quarterback that was there than necessarily him being the guy that the Steelers needed to fear. And it makes me ask the question to myself, how much does this even really impact the Steelers? Because yeah, he's a big name. He's a guy that they face, but like, if he was just on the Browns bench, he wouldn't have been a factor. Now he goes to Carolina. You might have to face him when the Steelers play the Panthers in Week 15 now.
Yeah, and I think there's some irony in the fact, too, that, you mentioned Cleveland having a choice of all the guys that went in the first round of quarterbacks that year, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen being the standouts. It is kind of funny, too, that now him and Sam Darnold are going to be competing for a starting job on the same team. When they were just
two quarterbacks picked in that draft.
And they're both on a different team. Like, it's not like Sam Darnold's still on his original team and now Baker Mayfield's there. They're both on a new team just a few years into it, pick number 1 and pick number 2 overall. But yeah, I guess you could argue it, Chris, that the Steelers now have to see Baker Mayfield again, and while we like to rag on him, and while, other than that wild card game, Pittsburgh's mostly had success against him, you could, I think, certainly argue that the Carolina Panthers got better today, and that is a team that the Steelers have to see late in the season. And if they are coming down the stretch and they're in some much-win situations, Week 15, 16, 17, and Baker Mayfield ends up, beating the Steelers, that could be one that we kind of look back on and, oh, man, you know what? That guy not got the last laugh, because you'll probably see him more times down the road depending on how his career goes. But yeah, I think Carolina got better and they're on your schedule at the end of the season. So it is fun to laugh at Cleveland. I think anyone who's listened to you and I on this podcast or on SNR knows that I'm not a big Baker Mayfield guy. And
Neither am I.
That goes back to him kicking WVU's butt every year when I was in school. All right, I'll admit it, or not when I was in school, but shortly after I graduated. I'll admit it. I'm not man enough I'm man enough to admit it. All right. But yeah, it's interesting that you're now going to see him at the end of the season, and the Steelers have had a lot of success against him, but new team, new system, new everything. I think it's not obviously a situation that I think Steelers fans. I did see some of this. People excited on Twitter that, oh, well, we'll still get to play Baker Mayfield this year. You might, you say that now, but you could very easily Week 15 be sitting there as that game unfolds and saying, "Oh man, I wish Sam Darnold or Matt Corral was in there instead."
And that, I think that's part of my wondering here, is that that's still a game that could have playoff implications when
Certainly.
the Steelers get to that part of the season. But at the same time, again, the last time they played Baker Mayfield, they sacked him 9 times. You tweeted about this, talking about how much of a butt whooping they laid on him.
I got some upset Browns fans in my mentions, man. I tell you what.
I saw they were pretty upset and hurting over the situation, and you bringing that up. But I quote tweeted, I was saying, like, it's ironic to me that just the year before that, the Browns fans we're celebrating. We just ended Ben Roethlisberger's career, and he's done his last game ever at Heinz Field. He was crying on the field after we knocked him out of the playoffs. And then flip side, Baker Mayfield, the hero that was supposed to carry them to the promised land, gets swept by Ben Roethlisberger in Heinz Field, and that's the last game he ever. And now he's gone unceremoniously. Go ahead.
Yeah, you absolutely. I was just gonna say real quick. Make no mistake about that. That hurts a large portion of Browns Nation.
And they don't want to
even have a nation. I shouldn't have said that. That hurts a large portion of Browns fans. Yeah. All right, because think about it. Baker Mayfield. I mean, a good majority of that fan base was ride or die with Baker Mayfield. We can laugh about it, but it's true. He's the first quarterback who's been there longer than to have a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? He's the first guy that's won them playoff games. A lot of people our age, like Chris and I, in our 30s and younger, the only quarterback they've seen win a playoff game in their lifetime is Baker Mayfield. I mean, when you have guys like that on your team, too, who are brash and arrogant and have a lot of personality, right, however you want to put it, you love you'll tend to defend those guys and cling to those guys when they're your own, and you'll hate them, if they're not. Maybe there's a little juju in that, that parallel there as well too. But yeah, it's hurting the Browns fans. Make no mistake about that. So I mean, that should at least put a smile on your face.
And I feel you on that. And again, I look at that time, especially how it flipped on this past year. It was kind of a sign that, like, man, everything was going great for the Browns. This was their time to rise up and be run the AFC North, and now all of a sudden they had to make this dramatic move to get Deshaun Watson. We're not even sure if he's going to play. We'll talk about that and really about the whole AFC North and where Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett both kind of stand in this division, because I do think it's very important to talk about. With Baker Mayfield leaving, it puts a bigger onus on what happens with Deshaun Watson if he doesn't play this year. Now Jacoby Brissett's vaulted in, and what does that do for the Steelers as far as where their quarterback level of play is at? We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, I got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. Built Bar is, of course, the place that you go when you want the healthy snacks that taste awesome. And they have a new Built Puff flavor called Coconut Brownie Chunk Puff. These are the people that invented healthy and tasty snacks. And when it comes to the latest gift to your taste buds, the Coconut Brownie Chunk Bar is going to be amazing. It's gonna be a flavor that you love in a delicious, chewy, marshmallowy, covered in 100% real chocolate, and it's a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. It's amazing. And if you listen to all the things about it, it carries a lot of the things that always come with a Built Bar or a Built Puff. It's low in calorie, low in sugar, high in protein, but completely delicious. The Coconut Brownie Chunk Puff are only here for a limited time. So go to built.com right now and make sure that you don't miss out, because they're going fast and they taste amazing, and that's why they're going fast. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. You can eat something that tastes good, but you can also eat this, which tastes good and is good for you. The best part about the Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing, and you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. They're the perfect treat, and perfect when you've got a craving, when you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or you just need a quick, healthy snack. So go to built.com right now and use that promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order when you visit built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Wes Uhler. Now, I wanted to revisit what Baker Mayfield leaving does. Now, of course, we all knew Baker Mayfield wasn't going to be playing for the Browns this season. He made it very clear. We talked about that for a while. It was kind of like the joke to see what would eventually happen. Now that we know that happened, we still don't know what will happen with Deshaun Watson. His case has been heard. They're still going over closing arguments. That's going to happen, I believe, in the next week or so. And then they're going to, I guess, then there's going to be a former judge who's going to decide what the punishment should be. Some say it could be a few games. Some say it could be a year. It could be more than a year. We don't know. But as it stands right now that we know for sure, hey, Baker Mayfield's out of the picture. He's out of the Cleveland Browns. I think it puts the Steelers in an interesting position with their quarterbacks. We recently did a power rankings on SteelersNow.com, Wes, where myself, Alan Saunders, and Nick Faribault, the three of us, we ranked all the AFC North quarterbacks, and this is, again, just on-field play and what we've seen from them in total in their careers. I put Deshaun Watson as the best quarterback. When he's on the field and he's playing with a full roster, that guy is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. That's not stating my opinion of what he's done off the field and whether he'll be able to play this year. That's just saying if he's on the field. But you still have Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. But if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, we now know for sure, there's no questions. There's no, hey, maybe Baker Mayfield walks through the door. Jacoby Brissett will be the Browns starter. How much closer are the Steelers actually to being at the top of the division if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, whether it's Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, I think, Chris, listen, long term is a completely different conversation for Deshaun Watson and the Browns. But as it relates to just now with 2022, I think it's going to be a year of turmoil for them. You know, whatever ends up happening with Deshaun Watson, if he gets 6 games, if he gets 8 games, if he gets an entire season, whatever it is, that's going to be a big factor on their year. I think we would all be shocked if the NFL comes out and it's a 2-game suspension or something like that. Like, this feels like it's going to be sizable, and maybe he appeals it down. I'm sure he will, actually. You know, like, that's what all these guys do when they get suspended, is they appeal it down, or they at least try to, and maybe that's something that plays out and lingers. And so maybe he's available while that process is going on, and then there's some back and forth, and he ends up not being able to play. Who knows what it's going to be, but it's going to hang over their season. I think it's going to be a year of turmoil for the Browns. They still have a very talented roster, without a doubt.
They have a very talented roster. There's no doubt about that.
A very talented roster. So I'm not saying a year of turmoil that they're going to bottom out and win 4 games or anything.
Yeah, I'm
like
not
that.
saying that.
I don't think that's going to be the case. But I think it's going to be an up and down year. I think they'll have weeks where they look really good. They'll have other weeks where they look bad. They'll play about 500 football. And maybe 7 or 8 wins. I think that's going to be the recipe for the Browns. And so, yeah, from just the scope of football, I don't think the Steelers are in the worst quarterback situation for 2022. Again, because long term with Deshaun Watson, we'll cross that bridge when we know what that bridge is going to look like first, or where that bridge is located. But I do think for the Steelers, yeah, I think you can certainly say right now that they have not the worst quarterback situation in the division until we know what Deshaun Watson's status is, because Jacoby Brissett is fine, but not
he's a fine backup.
Not for 17 games.
No, you'd want him in short spurts to come in and fill in and give you a couple good looks, but I agree with that assessment. And again, we're talking about, yes, Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett are unproven for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but we're just talking about the clearing the deficit here. Even if Deshaun Watson does play, like you said, I can still see, say he plays, they win a game. How many of those questions are going to be about Deshaun Watson, about winning the game versus any impending things with Deshaun Watson? How much is that going to take up the talk about, well, he shouldn't be playing? We've seen how the discourse over his off the field situation with sexual harassment and the charges that were not the charges, excuse me, the allegations, and the civil cases that have been laid against him. But we've seen how that's taken over the news cycle. I think that can be a dark cloud that messes with the Browns, even if he plays and even if their roster's healthy and all that. And another reason why I don't see them being really competitive this year. I agree with you. Not 4 wins or,
they're not going to bottom out, but
right. I don't see them doing that. They still have a really good offensive line, maybe the best 1-2 running back punch in the NFL. They still have Myles Garrett. They still got Denzel Ward. They got talent. They got lots of talent on that roster.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said when something like that hangs over your team for too long.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, I'm not naive enough to think that there's not some guys on the team who, weren't loving how everything went down this offseason. I don't know that Baker Mayfield had the complete and undying ride or die support of that locker room. They always said the right things about him publicly. You never know how they really feel, except for Odell Beckham Jr. and his father. I think we got a pretty clear answer on that one. But I think that there's got to be. These are professional football players. A lot of these guys, some of them are young and have only been in the league for a couple years. But a lot of these guys that are professional football players, they can't love how all this has hung over the franchise all offseason and how they're going to be asked about it now going forward for the next 7 or 8 months until the season's over. I just, Cleveland, they were, that place was, there was doom and gloom there and like a dark cloud that hang over the factory of sadness for so long, right? And it felt like they had at least gotten past that. I'm sure for some of these guys, it feels like it's back to, oh man, like it's not fun to even be in the building at this point.
But the other aspect of this, relating back to the Steelers, Baker Mayfield, I always felt like he was a okay quarterback that was being received elite hype. But part of what made him an okay quarterback was how balanced the Browns ran their offense when they were at their best. They ran the ball well. They had good receivers for him to throw to. I do think the Steelers could have a situation like that. They don't have the offensive line that the Browns have because the Browns invested highly into that offensive line. They paid a lot of money, spent some really top draft picks. They worked to make that line have a complete makeover around Baker Mayfield. But the Steelers do have a lot of playmakers on their roster, a lot like how the Browns used to have all the playmakers on their roster when they had Landry and Beckham, along with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. I do think that there's a chance that, in the spirit of how Baker Mayfield was for Cleveland, in the sense that he was more so the quarterback that, hey, don't lose the game, take what's in front of you.
Right.
I do think that there's a model for Mitch Trubisky and or Kenny Pickett to be the starter for the Steelers and win with the games, as long as the running game gets back in effect with Najee Harris leading the way, and the defense gets back to being an elite defense.
Yep, that's the kicker, and you need the offensive line, obviously, to take a step forward as well, too. But you're right. If you can run the football and the defense is able to stay relatively healthy, this is a team that, they're going to be in good shape. They're going to have to play organized, disciplined, buttoned-up football, right? They're not going to be able to turn the ball over a lot. The defense can't give up a bunch of huge plays or anything like that. They're going to have to win games in the margins, but they certainly have the capability to be a successful football team. And I think to use some of that model that the Browns had, but with a better head coach and a better defense.
That's certainly going to be interesting to see how the Steelers try to pull it off. But we're going to do something a little bit different, a little fun in our final segment here, because, we get questions all the time from our callers. This one wasn't a current, like, hey, Chris, what's your insights question. This is more so one of those fun, summary football questions.
Love it.
We're going to get into that right in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter here with Wesley Uhler. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Wes Uhler. We're talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, we did a lot about Baker Mayfield and the AFC North quarterback situation and what that has an impact on. But now let's take a step back and let's look at the Steelers as they are now. And it's time for one of the most classic questions in all of sports.
Yes.
This question was called in by one of our listeners. Murray from California wanted to ask us who we pick in a certain situation. Here's Murray's question.
Hey, Chris, this is Murray from Uptown, living out Cali now. I got a sort of a fantasy question for you guys. If you could pick any Steelers player to go along with the roster that we have on the field, with whatever the 53-man roster is that we are settled with, what all-time Steelers great would you pick to line up with these guys? I'm just saying, my pick is Rob Woodson. What do you guys think, Chris?
Murray asks the fun question, because everyone always does this. If you could take one Steeler from the past and put him on this team, who would it be? In some years, it's Dermonti Dawson because you want an offensive line. So, a few years back, it was Jerome Bettis because they really needed a running back. There's always been that. And Rod Woodson's usually a favorite pick because the Steelers always need a top-tier cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
Before Minkah Fitzpatrick, Troy Polamalu was a big pick for that. But I put a picture of Ben and a picture of Troy for the card on that call because those are two that I think that a lot of people are going
Popular
to add,
answers.
are going to say. Before I give my answer, Wes, if you had to pick one player, who would it be that you would bring back and put on this team?
Listen, Wesley Uhler, I'm a born and raised Pittsburgher, all right? I was born at Allegheny General Hospital on the North Shore of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right down the road from the Three Rivers Stadium, all right? I love defense. All right,
Ooh,
I could talk about Troy Polamalu. I could say, Joey Porter running with T.J. Watt. I mean, come on. We could talk about Mean Joe Green on this defensive line. We could talk about Kevin Green running alongside T.J. Watt as well too. And Rod Woodson, obviously another fantastic one. We could talk James Ferrier, somebody, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham to patrol the second level of the defense. To me, though, Chris, this is an easy answer. It's Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, come on.
Yeah, you set me up. I was thinking, who's he going? Is he going Mel Blunt? Who's he going on defense?
I could talk about, hey, you know what? Alan Faneca on this team this year? I mean, come on, Chris. And that's true. But the answer is Ben Roethlisberger. So you're telling me I'm going to get an 18-year first ballot Hall of Fame career? And let's be honest. Of those 18 seasons, 15 were probably at an elite level? 14 or 15 of those 18 seasons are going to be at an absolute elite level. To me that's a pretty easy answer. I know it's the chalk answer, but it's a passing league, it's a quarterback driven league. You put Ben Roethlisberger on this team, you got a chance to win the Super Bowl for the next 2 decades again.
If you put a prime Ben Roethlisberger, because here's the thing.
Imagine his mobility in the league now with these young weapons, with Pat Freiermuth, those guys will be able to play together for a decade.
Young Ben Roethlisberger didn't need a great offensive line in front of him. Remember when they won in 2008, they were supposedly the worst offensive line to win a Super Bowl.
Line, who's laughing now?
Right, wait. Ben said that on the victory stand after they won Super Bowl 43. I could totally see Ben Roethlisberger being a pick there. But I'm going to double down on your chalk, sir. I'm going to go with the guy with all the rings. I'm going to go with Terry Bradshaw.
I like it.
Because Terry Bradshaw also dealt with a lot of pressure. Terry Bradshaw also got rocked half of his career because there just weren't the protections in place. But I truly think that with the talent that the Steelers have right now, the way that guy used to call his own plays, the way that he stepped up in the playoffs, he'd be my pick. Now, that's a whole other episode because I'm sure we could debate till we're blue in the face who was the better Steelers quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger or Terry Bradshaw? Well, Ben he's the better player. He had less interceptions, and Terry won the rings, and that's a whole different situation. But I think both of you agreed to answer Murray's question. You'd pick a quarterback because if you could pick a Hall of Fame, because both of them are Hall of Fame quarterbacks, both of them are Super Bowl champion quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. If you could take one thing and add it to this team, you'd want it to be a quarterback who could manage this offense with all the playmakers that we're very excited to see. And yes, that's not to say that, talking about quarterbacks this whole episode, that's not to say that people shouldn't be excited for Mitch Trubisky and what he might do, or Kenny Pickett and what he might do. But wouldn't you love to not have to question it? Wouldn't you love to? Yeah. You'd love to say, hey, you know what? This is Hall of Fame level. Now the only thing you're really worried about is the offensive line and how much this quarterback gels with the playmakers on this offense. I do think it's a going away question. Okay, we both gave the chalk answer. Let's give non-chalk answers just to help, just to appease Murray here.
Mine, I said it there jokingly. It might actually be Alan Faneca. I got to think about this one for a quick second, but. Offensive line. Listen, the defense. As much as I would love to add that final chess piece to this, defense,
Rod Woodson on this defense would be scary as all get out,
bro. So would Mean Joe. So would Kevin Green. So would Joey Porter. I mean,
James Harrison.
Good.
James
Lord.
Harrison, prime James Harrison,
good Lord.
and T.J. Watt would be just be the death.
James Ferrier would go a long way to stabilize this defense well too. But it's already the highest paid defense in the NFL. So I think I'm still come on, what are we doing here? It's an offensive driven league, all right? You got to be able to get stops. Look at the Rams in the Super Bowl. Your boy Aaron Donald. You got to be able to get stops, but you got to have
Hitman.
Matthew Stafford to Cooper Kupp down the field, and they can't stop you to score the game-winning touchdown as well too. Faneca, Ooh, Antonio Brown. All right, I gotta leave now.
Okay, yeah. Look at you trying to start fights in our comment section by saying Antonio Brown. Now you're trying to hide off camera.
I'm out. All right, see you, everybody. Hey,
I'm gonna go similar position, similar area, just different position. I'm gonna go DeMarty Dawson.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Because here's the thing: is that I still think, and I talked about this in yesterday's episode. I think a big part of what happened with Kevin Dotson and his regression from his rookie season to his second season, on top of the injuries, was he didn't have a center next to him that could call the shots anymore. Pouncey wasn't great in 2020, but he was a veteran that he knew what was going on. He could put everyone on the same page. He could call out the defense. He could be a leader in and outside the huddle that people like Kevin Dotson could get behind. If you had DeMarty Dawson, who, a lot of people say Mike Webster is the greatest center. I've always said that I've always felt like DeMarty Dawson was the greatest center because of what he revolutionized the center position. Yeah, like people look at it differently because of him and what he did. Now you could also say Mike Webster, and I wouldn't argue with that either. But put a DeMarty Dawson in the middle of this offense. Now you have Kevin Dotson's looking at one of maybe the greatest center of all time to his right. If he had a ring, he might be in that. Yeah,
he would be heavy in the conversation.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the shame things that he was in the '90s era of the Steelers and wasn't on the right. Got there once, but just unfortunately they weren't able to seal the deal. But I think both of you are in the same place. It's offense. It's finding a way to stabilize the offense and get them the two weaknesses. And I think the whole point of this question is to say, what are the two weaknesses that you're most worried about for the Pittsburgh Steelers? And it's clearly offensive line and the uncertainty at quarterback.
Yeah, 100%. And, maybe we should have discussed some tackles in our conversation too, but let's be honest.
The Steelers don't have great tackles.
The Steelers, I mean, it is weird. Like they've had some good ones, but they
haven't had
DeMarty Dawson and Alan Faneca at tackle.
I mean, you think about the Steelers' career at center. They have DeMarty Dawson, Mike Webster, and Marquise Pouncey. At guard, you could say Alan Faneca, you could say David DeCastro. I mean, you could go back and look through their history. Even like the Strelzicks and the guys like that. There were plenty of talented guards that they've had over the years that you could get excited about. But center position, like the Steelers, definitely in my book have the best collection of centers in NFL history when you look back at it.
Yeah, Jeff Hardings as well too.
And Jeff Hardings, that's great. Like you're thinking, Jeff Hardings.
When he's like your fourth or fifth best center in franchise history, pretty good, pretty stacked there at that position. Yeah,
exactly. But it's weird enough. Whenever I look back through Steelers history, they have good tackles. They have guys like Sam Davis and guys like that stepped into the tackle position, but
Tunch,
never
baby.
Tunch, rest in peace, Tunch. One of the best human beings.
He made a Pro Bowl actually back when it was performance based and not popularity based.
Right. No, but Tunch is one of those guys that no one would ever talk about him in the Hall of Fame, but people would talk about him in the hey, that guy was a heck of a ball player at the tackle position, on top of being one of the best human beings you'll ever meet in your life. But I agree entirely. That's that. So I mean, the tackle position is tough, but guard, center, quarterback, those would be the first things that I'd address. So thank you, Murray, for your question calling in. Remember, if you ever want to ask a question on the Locked On Steelers podcast, just call 412-223-6644 or email LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. Just attach a MP3 file with your name and where you're from and keep your question under a minute. Because it helps us get through the show a lot faster and keep things flowing pretty smoothly. Thanks again for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thank you, Wes, for joining the Locked On Steelers podcast. We got to talk a little bit of news today, even though it wasn't too Steelers centric. We took a chance to step back and look at some things and answer a fantasy question from a fan. So it's always great having you here to do that, Wes. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, direct all angry AB tweets at Wesley Uhler. And if you're upset that I didn't mention Hines Ward, at Wesley Uhler. All right. I already know how these things go. All right. Listen, I'm veteran in this game now at this point. All right, Mr. Carter. Steelers Nation Radio. Arthur Moats and I host the Steelers Blitz. You can listen live, iHeartRadio app and website, Steelers.com, Steelers app as well too on your phone, or you can just do what all the cool kids do in 2022, and you can subscribe to Steelers Blitz wherever you get your podcast. Make it your second listen of the day after the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter on with us pretty much every single Monday on the show as well too. And then yes, as always, for you fellow tortured WVU souls, ears and beers for all of your Mountaineer podcasting needs.
Absolutely. Do check Wes out. Him and Adam Crowley do a great show there. And do check Wes out on SNR. Him and Arthur Moats do a great job there as well. Thanks again, Wes, for coming on. And thank you for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast that you can find on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, or YouTube. If you watch this video on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You get all the great stuff we do. If you want to help out this podcast, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. You do both at the same time. You get a shout at the end of the show. Like this person, we have the dude 8705 says, here we go. 5 stars. One of my favorite Steelers podcasts. Thanks for giving us something new to look forward to daily. Appreciate all your hard work, Chris. Looking forward to training camp. Hashtag here we go. Thank you, dude 8705. We appreciate you very much for giving us the 5-star review. If you want your shout out, go on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review with a positive comment. Doesn't have to be long, just something like that. And even if you've done it before, it helps us out and gets the word out about what we're doing here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again to Wes for joining us on the Thursday edition. We'll be back tomorrow with the Friday edition. Jenna Harner will be on with us. It's going to be a fun show. We'll see you then right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.